I need to check the used names list and then write the story. The used names from the file: Eleanor, Caroline, Beth, Henry, Marjorie Whitcomb, Doreen, Travis, Renee, Patricia Halloway, Lorraine, Brielle, Walter, Constance, Bennett, Whitney, Margaret, Judith, Daniel, Serena, Nadine, Gloria, Nathan, Vanessa, Adele, Owen, Diane, Paulette, Iris, Colin, Frank, Ruthann, Sylvia, Jason, Heather, Beverly, Linda, Liam, Cassandra, Roland, Philip, Meredith, Cecily, Marlene, Connor, Tessa, Brody, Aldine, Kristin, Miles, Dorothea. I'll use completely new names: Vivian, narrator/mother, April, daughter, Derek, son-in-law, Gwendolyn, April's mill, Pete, narrator's late husband, Sandra, narrator's friend, co-worker. I keep a photo on the windowsill above my kitchen sink. It's creased along one corner, slightly faded from years of morning light. In it, my daughter is maybe 7 years old, gap-toothed, sitting on my lap at a 4th of July picnic. She's laughing so hard her eyes are nearly shut. I'm laughing too, looking at her like she hung the moon. I look at that picture sometimes when I'm washing dishes, and I think about the woman I was then. The woman who had no idea what she was building, or what she was slowly, carefully dismantling inside herself. I tell you this, not because I want sympathy. I'm 63 years old. I've been through enough to know that sympathy doesn't fill the hole where your sense of self used to be. I tell you this because I want you to understand how it happens. How a perfectly intelligent, capable woman can spend 20 years handing away pieces of herself, one small piece at a time, until the day comes when she's standing in a hotel ballroom in a dress she didn't choose, at a table near the kitchen door, and she finally understands that she has been erased. That day was my daughter April's wedding, and what happened that night changed both of our lives. My husband Pete died when April was 11. Pancreatic cancer. Fast and merciless. The way it always is. We had 9 weeks between diagnosis and the end, which wasn't enough time to say half of what needed saying, but was somehow still enough time to watch a strong man become a shadow of himself. April was old enough to understand what she was losing, and young enough to be absolutely undone by it. She stopped eating properly for almost 2 months. She slept in my bed until she was nearly 13. I didn't push her out because I needed her there just as much as she needed me. It was just the two of us after that, in our 3-bedroom house in Dayton, Ohio, that suddenly felt like it had 40 rooms. I went back to work full-time at the county records office, which paid steadily if not generously. I picked up weekend shifts at a home goods store for the first 2 years. I packed April's lunches, drove her to swim practice at 5:30 in the morning, sat in the bleachers at every meet even when I'd worked a double the day before. I did all the things a mother does when she's also playing the role of father, financial planner, grief counselor, and cheerleader all at once. I don't say this to make myself sound heroic. At the time, it didn't feel like sacrifice. It felt like survival. It felt like love. Those two things get tangled up so easily when you're a single parent, and by the time you notice the difference, the habit is already set. April was bright, genuinely bright in a way that made teachers stop and pay attention. She got a partial academic scholarship to Ohio State, which covered roughly 40% of her tuition. I took out a Parent Plus loan for the rest, $31,000, which I paid back over 10 years, every month without missing one payment. I didn't tell April the exact number. I didn't want her to feel the weight of it. Looking back, I think that was my first serious mistake. She graduated with a degree in marketing, moved to Columbus, got a job with a mid-sized advertising firm, and within 5 years was making more money than I had ever made in my life. I was proud of her in a way that's hard to describe. Not the quiet, private pride of a parent who's just glad their kid turned out okay, but something bigger and louder, something that sometimes came out at strange moments, like when I'd see a billboard on the highway and think, my daughter makes those. My daughter does that. I don't know exactly when the distance started. It crept in the way cold air does. You don't notice it until you're already shivering. She stopped calling as often. When I called her, the conversations got shorter. She was busy, she said. She was traveling for work. She was networking, building her career, living the life I'd worked to give her. I told myself this was what success looked like. I told myself I should be grateful. Then she met Derek. Derek was from Cincinnati, from what April described as a comfortable family, which turned out to mean his parents owned a manufacturing company, had a vacation home in Hilton Head, and belonged to a country club. He was polite to me, in the way that well-raised people are polite to someone they consider peripheral. He shook my hand firmly at our first meeting, asked me one or two questions about my job, and then spent the rest of dinner talking to April about people I didn't know. I told myself I was being uncharitable. I told myself I just needed time to warm up to him. They got engaged 18 months later. April called me on a Thursday evening. She was excited, genuinely, sparklingly excited. And I was excited for her. We talked for almost an hour, which was longer than we'd talked in months. It felt like old times. It felt like the beginning of something good. Then she said, "Mum, I've been thinking about the wedding." "Of course," I said. "Tell me what you're imagining." What she was imagining was a venue outside of Columbus, a converted barn and event space that had been featured in a regional bridal magazine. 220 guests, a live band, not a DJ, flowers done by a boutique florist she'd already met with, a photographer who had a 4-month wait list, catering that ran a certain number of dollars per plate. When she told me the estimated total, I was quiet for a moment. "April," I said carefully, "that's around $160,000. "I know it sounds like a lot," she said, "but Derek's parents are contributing 50,000, so the gap isn't as bad as it sounds. The gap, $110,000 was the gap. I want to be clear about something. At that point in my life, I had approximately $40,000 in savings, money I had set aside over many years for retirement. My house was paid off, which gave me some equity. I had no other significant assets. I was 61 years old, still working full-time, not yet drawing Social Security. I should have said no. I know that now. Every sensible part of me knew it then. But April was talking about this wedding the way she used to talk about swim meets when she was 12, with this lit-up certainty that it was going to happen, that it was going to be perfect, and that I was going to be there cheering. And I could not figure out how to be the person who turned off that light. So I said I would figure it out. I cashed out my savings. I took out a home equity line of credit for $60,000, which I would spend the next decade paying back. I did not tell April the full extent of what this meant for my retirement. And she did not ask. She did not ask. I want to sit with that for a moment, because I've sat with it many times myself. She was a grown woman making over 6 figures a year. She was marrying into a family with real, substantial wealth. And she did not ask her 61-year-old mother, her widowed mother who had taken out loans to put her through college, whether this was manageable. She assumed it was, or she chose not to examine it too closely. I don't know which is worse. The planning began in earnest about 14 months before the wedding date. April had strong opinions about everything, which was not surprising. She had always been someone who knew exactly what she wanted. Her future mother-in-law, Gwendolyn, also had strong opinions, and she had the social ease and financial confidence that comes from spending a lifetime in rooms where no one questions whether you belong. The two of them formed an alliance immediately, and it was efficient and impenetrable, and I was not part of it. I found out about the finalized florist from an email I was CC'd on. I found out about the menu change when April mentioned it in passing on a phone call about something else. When I offered to help address invitations, April said they were already having them professionally calligraphed. When I asked about the rehearsal dinner seating, I was told that Derek's family was handling that event, and my input wasn't needed. Each of these things on its own was small. That's how it works. Each thing is small enough to absorb, to excuse, to file away without making a scene. But they accumulate. They accumulate the way water gets into a foundation, invisible and patient, until suddenly one wall shifts and nothing is level anymore. I flew to Columbus 2 weeks before the wedding to help with whatever needed doing. April had a list. The list was real and specific, and it involved driving things from one place to another, picking up orders, dropping things off. I was useful in the way that a reliable vehicle is useful. I drove, I carried, I confirmed, I organized. I was not consulted. I was deployed. One evening, we were sitting at her kitchen table after a long day, and I said, "April, I'd love to say something at the reception, just a few words. I have some things I'd like to, Mom." She cut me off gently but completely. Derek's aunt is already doing a toast, and Gwendolyn wants to keep the program tight. We don't want it to run long. I'm not suggesting a long speech, I said. 5 minutes. Maybe less. I'll talk to Derek about it, she said. She never mentioned it again. The morning of the wedding, I did April's mother of the bride duty. I sat with her while the hair and makeup team worked. I brought her coffee. I held her bouquet while she put on her shoes. Gwendolyn arrived and the energy in the room shifted immediately, the way it does when someone walks in who believes the room is theirs. She and April embraced warmly, and then Gwendolyn said to me, brightly and without malice, "Oh, you're here too. How wonderful." Like I was a pleasant surprise. Like I was a neighbor who dropped by. I don't think she meant to be cruel. I think she simply had no framework for including me because April had never built one. The ceremony was beautiful. I cried. I held a tissue in my left hand throughout the whole thing, and I cried quietly, and I watched my daughter walk down the aisle in a dress that Gwendolyn had accompanied her to pick out. And I told myself that the dress was beautiful, and the day was beautiful, and that was what mattered. The reception seating chart had me at table 11. The venue had 15 tables. Table 11 was not the last table numerically, but it was the last table spatially, positioned near the side entrance where the catering staff moved in and out. I shared it with April's former co-worker from her first job, a college friend I'd never met, Derek's cousin who had flown in from Portland and spent most of the night on his phone, and two women I never successfully identified despite trying twice. The head table where April and Derek sat was across the room. She looked happy. She looked radiant, actually. She moved through the room that evening with this gorgeous confidence, and I watched her from table 11 and felt something complex, proud and hollowed out in the same breath. The way you sometimes feel at the end of a very long undertaking when you realize the undertaking wasn't quite what you thought it was. I went to find her during the cocktail hour, before dinner was served. I touched her arm gently and she turned, and for just a moment she looked at me the way she used to when she was small, like I was her whole world. And then something shifted, the way it sometimes does when we're playing a role in a place where we're also being watched. And she said quietly, "Mom, could you maybe not hover? Gwendolyn's friends keep trying to talk to me and I need to be—" "I'm not hovering," I said. "I just wanted a minute with my daughter." She pressed her lips together. "Can we do this later?" We did not do it later. Dinner was served. A toast was given by Derek's best man, which was funny and warm. Gwendolyn stood and said a few words about her son and her new daughter, and everyone at the head table laughed at the right moments. The DJ, they'd switched from the live band to a DJ at some point without mentioning it to me, played the couple's first dance song, and everyone gathered around the floor, and I stood near the edge of the crowd and watched my daughter dance with her husband. It was just after 11 o'clock when it happened. I had been looking for April for a while, not to hover, not to make demands, just because I was her mother and it was her wedding, and I had spent $100,000. I didn't have to make this night happen, and I wanted one real moment with her before it was over. I found her near the coat check in a small alcove away from the main room. She was touching up her lipstick in a compact mirror, and when she heard my footsteps, she looked up. I said, "I just wanted to tell you that you look absolutely beautiful tonight. I'm so proud of you. I love you more than I can say." She snapped the compact shut. She looked at me for a long moment, and her expression was something I had not seen before. It wasn't anger exactly, or contempt exactly. It was something more exhausted than either of those things, like she had been carrying something heavy for a long time and had just run out of patience for pretending otherwise. "Mum," she said, "I need you to stop making tonight about you." I didn't move. I said, "I don't know what I did to give you that impression. You're always—" She stopped. Started again. "You make everything feel like I owe you something. You always have. And I just—" Another pause. A breath. "I just wish that, for once, just once, you could be happy for me without making me feel guilty about it." I stood very still. "April," I said, "I haven't said a single thing tonight about what this cost me. Not once. I haven't asked you for anything. I've sat at my table and watched your evening and cheered for you from a distance because that is what you have asked me to do." She shook her head. "You don't have to say it, Mom. It's in how you look at me." I felt something happen in my chest. Not breaking exactly, more like a last seam letting go, something that had been held together under pressure for a very long time, finally releasing. I see, I said. I was quiet for a moment. I was looking at my daughter in her beautiful dress, in the venue I had borrowed against my home to give her, on the night that was supposed to be the beginning of the rest of her life. And I thought about the photograph on my windowsill, that 7-year-old laughing on my lap. I thought about the swim meets, the loans, the lunches, the 5:30 mornings, the 10 years of plus loan payments I made alone, without ceremony, without a single thank you that acknowledged what it actually was. I have loved you completely, I said. I have given you everything I had. And if the way I look at you makes you feel guilty, I think that might be something worth sitting with, April. Because I didn't create that feeling. I can't be responsible for it. She looked away. I'm going to go back to my hotel, I said. I'll say goodbye to Derek. I wish you both a beautiful life. And that is what I did. I found Derek near the bar, shook his hand, told him to take good care of her, and meant it. I got my coat. I walked out of that venue into the cold October air, and I sat in my rental car in the parking lot for about 4 minutes without moving, and then I drove back to the Hampton Inn, and I ordered room service, and I watched old episodes of a British baking show until I fell asleep. I cried, of course. You don't walk out of your daughter's wedding reception without crying. But I also slept better that night than I had in months. There was something clarifying about it. Something that comes when you finally stop contorting yourself to fit into a space that was never meant to hold you. The next morning, I booked an earlier flight home. April called me 3 days after the wedding. She and Derek had returned from a short honeymoon in Savannah. Her voice on the phone was careful, not warm, but not cold either. She said the wedding had been beautiful. She said it had all come together perfectly. She did not mention our conversation in the alcove. I let the silence sit after she finished speaking. Then I said, I'm glad it was what you wanted, April. Another silence. Mom, are you okay? I'm fine, I said. I've actually been doing some thinking since I got home. About what? About boundaries, I said. Mine, specifically. I've been thinking about what it means to love someone at the expense of yourself, and whether that's actually love or just a very deeply ingrained habit. She didn't say anything right away. Then are you in therapy? I've made an appointment, I said, but this isn't coming from a therapist. This is coming from me. From standing in a parking lot at 11 o'clock at night and realizing that I have spent so many years making myself smaller so that you could feel bigger, and I'm not willing to do that anymore. Mom, I never asked you to. April. I kept my voice very even. I need you to listen rather than defend right now. Can you do that? A pause. Yes. I love you, I said. I will always love you. But I'm done being invisible. I'm done sitting at table 11. I'm done sitting at table 11. I'm done being thanked for nothing and questioned for everything. If we're going to have a real relationship, an honest one, an adult one, it has to be built on something different than what we've had. I'm going to need you to see me, not as a resource, not as a source of guilt, as your mother, as a person who gave up a great deal to raise you well and who deserves, at minimum, to be seen, she cried. Not a lot, but genuinely. I could tell the difference. April had always been a person who cried rarely and briefly, and only when something had actually cut through. I didn't realize, she said. I mean, I knew you did a lot, but I didn't realize how much I know, I said, because I never made you feel the weight of it, and that was my mistake. I thought I was protecting you. I think I was actually just protecting myself from having to ask for what I needed. We talked for almost 2 hours that day. It was not a resolution. Those don't happen in one phone call, no matter what anyone tells you. But it was a beginning. The first real beginning we'd had in years. That was 2 years ago. We've been in therapy, both of us sometimes together in family sessions, sometimes separately. It has been difficult and uncomfortable, and occasionally wonderful. April has apologized to me in ways that were specific and real. She looked me in the eye at Christmas last year and said, Mom, I'm sorry I put you at table 11. I'm sorry for a lot of things, but that one specifically, because it was so small and so deliberate and I knew it would hurt you and I did it anyway. That apology I keep somewhere close to the 4th of July photograph. I am still paying off my home equity line. I will be for another 8 years. Derek and April have offered to help with the payments, and after a long time of refusing, because refusing felt like dignity, I accepted, not the full amount, but some, because allowing the people who love you to help you is also a form of dignity, and it took me a long time to learn that. My retirement will look different than I planned. I'll likely work until 67. I've made my peace with that, though some mornings it's harder to hold that peace than others. What I haven't made peace with, what I'm not sure I need to make peace with, is the version of myself who kept shrinking. The woman who sat at table 11 because she had convinced herself that her daughter's comfort was more important than her own presence. I look at her with something that is more compassion than anger now, most days. She was doing what she knew. She was loving in the only language she'd ever been taught. But I don't want to be her again. I have a standing dinner with a friend named Sandra, my oldest friend, a woman I've known since we were both young mothers pushing strollers through the same Dayton neighborhood. She's the one who picked up the phone at midnight when I drove back from Columbus and said, "Tell me everything." She's the one who said, not unkindly, "Vivian, you have been letting that girl practice erasing you for 15 years. And the only person who could have stopped it was you." She was right, and I told her so. And we split a bottle of wine, and she held my hand across the table. That's the thing about getting older that nobody warns you about when you're in the middle of raising children and building lives and surviving loss. The work doesn't end. The becoming doesn't end. I am 63 years old and I am still figuring out who I am when I am not in service to someone else. Some days, that's frightening. Most days, it feels like the most important project I've ever taken on. I still have the photograph on the windowsill. I still love my daughter with the whole of whatever I am. But I have learned, finally, and not without cost, that love is not the same as disappearance. That being a good mother does not require you to be an invisible one. That the most honest thing I could have done for April all those years ago was to let her see me, clearly, fully, as a person with needs and limits and a life that mattered beyond her own. She is seeing me now. It's late, and it came with a great deal of pain. But she is seeing me, and I am letting myself be seen. And I think that is something. I think that might be everything. I wash the dishes every morning and I look at that photograph and I say, out loud sometimes, to no one in particular, I'm still here. I'm still here. I'm still here. And I'm not at table 11 anymore. I've thought a lot about cause and effect since that October night, not in any mystical sense, just the plain, honest mechanics of it. The things we do accumulate. The things we don't do accumulate just as fast. I spent 20 years making choices that felt like love in the moment, and I don't regret loving April. I regret the way I loved her, quietly, invisibly, without ever letting her feel the full weight of what it costs to raise a child alone, to take out loans in your 60s, to sit in the bleachers at 5:30 in the morning when your body is tired and your savings are shrinking, and you do it anyway because she is your whole reason. I built a daughter who didn't know how to see me. That's the hard truth I've had to sit with. I didn't teach her because I was too busy protecting her from discomfort. And a person who has never been asked to hold discomfort doesn't develop the muscle for it. April wasn't cruel by nature. She was unexercised in gratitude. And that was something I had a hand in. That's what I mean by cause and effect. Not punishment, not cosmic balance, just the straightforward consequence of a pattern playing out over time. What required real intelligence, the kind I wish I'd used sooner, was recognizing the pattern while I was still inside it. I couldn't see it clearly when I was in the middle of signing loan documents or driving things across Columbus like a reliable car that nobody thinks to thank. I needed distance. I needed October night air and a parking lot, and 4 quiet minutes before I could finally see the shape of what I'd been doing. Wisdom isn't always loud. Sometimes it shows up as a stillness, a moment where you stop explaining yourself and simply say, enough. That's what happened at the coat check. I wasn't angry. I wasn't performing dignity. I was just finally, genuinely done, contorting myself into a shape that fits someone else's comfort. That is what I want April to understand, and what I think she is slowly beginning to, that a person who knows their own worth doesn't need to announce it. They just stop apologizing for taking up space, and the resilience part, that came after. because walking out of a wedding is one night. Living with the aftermath is 2 years of difficult conversations, family therapy sessions, awkward Christmases, learning to accept help I spent decades refusing. Resilience isn't toughness, it isn't powering through. It's staying present in the repair work, even when it's slow, even when you're tired, even when part of you wants to simply withdraw and protect yourself from further hurt. I stayed. April stayed. That took something from both of us. I am still paying off what I borrowed. I will be for years. Some mornings that fact feels heavier than others. But I am also still here. Present, seen, no longer at table 11. That cost something too. And it was worth every penny.